What makes classic cars worth so much money? Today we're going to review a couple cars that recently crossed the block at Mecum Auto Auctions to figure out whether the classic car market is going up or whether it's going down. Let's get started. The first car that we're going to take a look at is a 1965 Shelby GT350. The first year GT350 is going to be a pretty good indicator of what the classic car market is doing currently compared to the prices about 6 to 8 months ago. The most recent sale was of course last weekend at the Mecum Auto Auction, where a car recently sold for $522,000 all in. Now this car was a pretty special car. It was basically 100% completely original. So it had the original 289 Hypo in it. It also had original sheet metal, original fiberglass hood. It had the stripes that went over top. It was a well-known car from a well-known Shelby collector. And that's probably why it brought $522,000. The first car we're going to compare the car that just sold last weekend to is a car that sold at Indy, which was back in May. It was an original drivetrain car, meaning that it does have the original numbers matching 289 in it, also had the numbers matching transmission. It did sell for $319,000, or about $200,000 less than the car that just sold. The last Shelby GT350 that we're going to take a look at is the one that sold on Bring a Trailer back in March. Now this was an original drivetrain car as well. It was a double-digit car, meaning that it was one of the first 100 Shelbys sold at the Shelby facility in Venice before they moved out to the Los Angeles airport. That does affect the value, and that's probably why this one brought about $450,000. But how does this one stack up compared to the last two that we just saw? Well, this one sold for $450,000. The one that sold at Indy sold for $319,000, and the one that just sold this past weekend sold for $522,000. That tells me that the market out there thinks that a Shelby GT350, at least from 1965, is a pretty strong investment in today's market, and someone was willing to pay the most out of the last year for it. Now this next one's pretty cool. We can learn a lot about this one. So this is a 1971 Chevelle Supersport LS5. So that means that it has the 454 cubic inch, 365 horsepower big block down inside the hood. And basically what that means is it was the top dog of 1971. Now this is an original black on black car, so in the car community, the colors really do matter when you're talking about classic cars, and black on black is probably one of the most sought after color combinations in a Chevelle. Being also a LS5 makes it even more rare, so it's a pretty rare car to start out with that someone took a gamble and turned into a resto mod. Now they did replace the engine with a 540 cubic inch motor. It has a roller camshaft, Brodux heads, has a Tremec 5-speed in it, 12-bolt posi traction rear end. They didn't stray too far away from the original style of the car. And what I mean by that is it has basically like the original gauges in there. Maybe they're a little bit upgraded with the Dakota digitals, but the door cards are the same, carpet's the same, seats are the same, console's the same, steering wheel's the same. It's not a full-blown custom, different interior, anything like that, but it is well done. The engine bay's been cleaned up just a little bit, but it looks pretty much the way that it was back in the day. Basically what I'm trying to say about this car is it is resto modded, but it's not resto modded over the top. Now this car did sell for $214,000, which I think is an enormous amount of money for this car for the restoration that was done on it. However, it was a really rare car to start out with. It wasn't your plain Jane Chevelle, so we'll take a look at what a black on black Chevelle LS5 normally sells for. So back in the archives of Mecum, we find that there was a black on black car that went across the block in 2022, and the bid went on at $92,000. But I want to take a look at one more car that was sold at Barrett-Jackson at Palm Beach this past year. So this also is a 1971 Chevelle LS5, however this one is red with black interior, and it does still have the original 454 down inside. This car only brought $82,500 all in. But you guys let me know in the comments below, if you find a LS5 71 Chevelle, are you going to resto mod it, or are you going to take it back to original? In my opinion, it depends on the year. This is a 71, so it's not as desirable as the 70s. If this was a 70 LS5 convertible or LS6 convertible, or a black on black 70 LS5 or 6, we might be having a different conversation. But because this is a little bit, not an off year, but just a year that's not as desirable in the market, I think the resto mod was a great idea, and I think the gamble paid off. The next car we're going to take a look at is a 1969 Copo Camaro. Camaro RS. Now the RS package on the Copos is extremely rare. We think they only made about 58 of them total out of the 1,000 production Copo cars. This car also happens to be sold by Berger Chevrolet, which was a huge performance parts dealer back in the 1960s and early 70s. We can see that this car has been rotisserie restored. It is in Fathom Green with a green interior. Of course, it has all the Copo goodies like the 427. It does have the 12 bolt, the big rear end. Overall, just a really nice Camaro. This car recently sold for $170,000, and we'll see exactly where that stacks up against the other two that I was able to find. Now, this green Copo was sold in Scottsdale 2023 at Barrett-Jackson, and we can see that it also was McNiche certified, so we know it's a true Copo car, as well as this car was originally sold in Canada. Not quite Michigan, but pretty close. Back in January, when this one crossed the block, we can see that it sold for around $170,000 as well. So no real money has been lost so far over the last 8 months. The third Copo car we're going to take a look at is this Daytona yellow one that sold back in May at a Mecum auction in Indy. We see that it brought $178,000. This car also was restored here in Pennsylvania by a well-known car restoration shop. It does have the original matching numbers L72 427. It does have the correct rear end code, and this one also was sold in Canada. But what can we learn about these Camaros and the prices that they sold for? Well, all of the cars are around $170,000 to $180,000 over the last 8 months. The cars do differ in color though, and in Camaros that does mean a lot. The first car is a Fathom Green car, although Fathom Green being a good color, it's not as desirable as a yellow or some of the brighter colors in the field. It also was an RS Copo, which probably should have made it push for a little bit more money, but I do think the color of that car is really what held it back. It also never mentions that it was Camaro High Performance or McNiche certified, so that might have affected the value as well. Overall, I think the last 3 Copo cars that we just took a look at have sold for similar prices over the last year, and I don't think that means anything about the Camaro market going up or down, and it really depends on the color car you have and how well it was documented. The next car that we're going to talk about that sold last weekend is the 1968 Ford Mustang GT500 that was done into an Eleanor clone. This is actually a licensed car, and it did start out as an S-Code 390 big block car that now was turned into basically a resto mod. It's got vintage air, they switched over to a 427. Of course, it's got the Go Baby Go shift knob in there, everything that you would want on an Eleanor clone. This car ended up selling for $330,000, but let's see how that stacked up to 2 other cars that recently sold. The first car that we're going to compare it to is one that sold at Palm Beach 2023 at a Barrett-Jackson auction. Now this one would actually be a 67 Mustang, which would be the correct year for the Eleanor clone. However, the VIN number that's provided on Barrett-Jackson doesn't really tell us the correct VIN number, so I don't know if this was an S code or whether it was a T code or C code starting out. I do know that it was sold with a small block 408, which probably was a small block car, probably a C code 289 originally. And what that means is it doesn't have a big block 427 like the licensed version that we just saw first. This car is also officially licensed, and it did sell for $286,000, but these cars are very different in price depending on the engine and options that are available. This car was painted in a different color, not the gray that we're all familiar with. Let us know in the comments below which color you like better, but I do believe that being a small block, it did affect the value at only $286,000. The next car we're going to compare is an Eleanor clone that was not licensed to be built, and we'll see how that affects the value. Now this car was sold at Mecum Harrisburg 2023. I did see this car in person, and we do have a video on this car earlier on the channel, but it is actually a 67 car, and it does have the correct VIN. We can see that it is a C code, so no big deal. Was a 289 to start out. This car does now have a 427 underneath the hood, and it was very well done. However, it just wasn't done as well as some of the other cars that are licensed that are supposed to be pretty much exact replicas of the car that we're all familiar with in the movie. This car ended up selling for only $165,000, and I hope you guys can see in the photos the reason why. Keep in mind that the first Eleanor that we took a look at was an S-Code car, meaning it was a big block 390 car, so the original base car that they started out with was a more valuable car than the C-Code that only sold for $165,000. Overall, I think the prices of these cars are going up in value, and we can see that if you do have a licensed version, then you're pretty much in good hands. The last car we're going to take a look at is a 1963 Corvette split window. This car is a fuel-injected 327 car, so it does have 360 horsepower, but what's really cool is it's painted in black with a red gut. Probably one of the most desirable color combinations, This car did not sell for $230,000, and I wanted to figure out exactly why. I have found several other cars that we can compare to it. The first one being this black car that sold at Kissimmee in 2023. Remember, that was back in January. It's also a fuel-injected car, but I can tell you guys right off the bat that this car is probably not restored as well as the last car that we took a look at. The reason being is because it does have knockoff wheels, and they didn't offer knockoff wheels on production cars in 1963. That does kind of just tell me that the person that restored this car, not saying it was a bad car, it's just not original to what the car truly is. And it does show that the numbers match on the motor, and that is true for the car that we previously just looked at as well. This car did sell for $220,000, which I do think is a pretty good deal. It is a numbers matching split window Corvette. Now remember, I haven't seen these cars in person, but in my opinion from the pictures, it's just not restored as good or as nice as the car that we previously looked at. But what does that mean? How much was that black Corvette worth? Well, we're going to take a look at a car that I found at Barrett-Jackson that sold in Palm Beach. This is also a 1963 split window Fuelie car, 360 horse, but it is done in ermine white with the red interior. This is also a very desirable Corvette color combination, and this car sold for $291,000. The restorations on both these cars, this car and the very first one, is in pretty much similar condition, and I believe that the owner of the black car that only brought $230,000 that didn't sell was looking somewhere in the figure of $290,000 to $300,000 for that car. It is that rare, it is that desirable. Maybe the money just wasn't in the room. Now, that really doesn't answer the question whether the Corvette market is going up or it's going down, but what I want to show you guys is what I personally think is happening in the C2 Corvette market. Over the last couple years, we've seen a lot of resto mod mid-year Corvettes go across the block, and they're starting to bring astronomical amounts of money. This car was sold for $286,000, and it does have all the creature comforts of a modern car. I believe that cars like this are a little bit older. They're a 1963. They're not a 69 or a 70s or anything like that. So the market for these cars is kind of dying off. And I believe that the market is now moved towards a resto mod trend. In other words, people love the look of a C2 mid-year Corvette, but they want to drive one like a modern car. If you guys kind of agree with me or have a different opinion, please let me know in the comments below. If you guys like this style of video, give us a thumbs up here on the channel, and we'll consider making more content just like this. Again, my name is Parker with Backyard Barn Finds. Have a great day.